Jeremiah had always felt more alive among trees than he ever did between walls. The wilderness didn't just speak to him, it sang, it breathed. It welcomed him like an old friend. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video. On that particular trip into the heart of the Rocky Mountains, the wind carried a stillness that felt heavier than usual, like the forest itself was holding its breath. For Jeremiah, now 45, these bi-monthly treks into the wild were more than tradition. They were ritual, reset, a reunion with something ancient, something pure. But this time, the journey wasn't his alone. His father, Jack, now 75, had come along. The man who had first introduced Jeremiah to the whispering language of nature was no longer the tireless trailblazer he used to be. Time had crept into his bones and carved deep valleys into his face. But it hadn't touched his spirit. There was still fire behind those aging eyes, a flicker of adventure, burning steady and bright. Jack had raised Jeremiah in the wilderness, teaching him how to survive it, read it, and most importantly, respect it. They chose their campsite, careful a patch of level earth tucked beneath towering pines, where the ground was soft, and the view of the mountains stretched endlessly into a golden horizon. The sun dipped low, casting everything in amber. Jeremiah moved with quiet skill, building their shelter with pine branches and rope, while Jack, hands weathered and cracked but still steady, gathered stones and wood to start a fire. Not many words were exchanged. They didn't need to. This had always been their rhythm. Jeremiah hunted, Jack cooked, the wild watched. The sun vanished and stars spilled across the night sky. The forest came alive in a softer, stranger way. Owls called. The breeze carried stories through the trees. As Jack stoked the fire and Jeremiah returned from the woods with a brace of rabbits, all felt calm, familiar, whole. But fate has a habit of whispering when the world grows too quiet. Later that night, while Jack snored softly near the fire, Jeremiah stirred. Something was wrong. A sound barely there had nudged him from sleep. His senses, sharpened from years in the wild, recognized the forest's usual rhythm. But this wasn't part of it. There were footsteps, human ones. Carefully, silently, Jeremiah slid out of his bedroll, his boots brushing pine needles as he crept toward the sound. Moonlight painted the forest in silver and shadow. As he reached a dense wall of bushes overlooking the riverbank, he crouched low and peered through. 5 men. They stood near the river, hunched and hurried, their shapes outlined by the moon. Jeremiah narrowed his eyes, trying to make out their movements. The men were pushing something heavy-shaped like a box, maybe a crate, toward the water. There was a splash. Then the men bent again, chains glinting faintly as they fastened something and let it sink. Their actions were quiet, practiced, and secretive. Jeremiah didn't move. His breath slowed, but his heart raced. Something was off. This wasn't camping. This wasn't fishing. This was a burial. When the men finally vanished into the trees, Jeremiah waited. Then, with the adrenaline still thick in his blood, he slipped back into his bedroll, eyes fixed on the darkened canopy overhead. Sleep never came. The next morning, he was up before the birds. Jack still slept as Jeremiah stepped into the freezing river, fully clothed. The rocks beneath his boots were slick and sharp, but he moved with care. He reached the area where the 5 men had gathered and began to search. His hands swept through the water, tracing the bottom slowly, patiently. Then there it was. Cold steel brushed his fingertips. A chain. His grip tightened, and he heaved. It didn't budge. "Dad!" he shouted suddenly, voice sharp with urgency. "I need your help!" Jack jolted upright, disoriented for a moment, then hurried toward the water when he saw his son struggling with something submerged beneath the surface. Without hesitation, he kicked off his boots, rolled up his pants, and waded in. Together, the father and son grasped the chain and began to pull. It was heavier than expected, far heavier than anything natural. The river fought them. The object resisted. Their hands burned, muscles screamed, but they didn't stop. Little by little, the chain gave. The water frothed around them. Whatever lay beneath was surfacing, reluctantly, as if it wanted to stay hidden. After nearly an hour of effort, the object finally broke free, rising slowly with the weight of water and secrecy. It rolled to shore, muddy and slick. The 2 men collapsed beside it, soaked and gasping. The object was large, metallic, its shape obscured by algae and rust. But one thing was certain. It was a chest. A heavy, sealed iron chest with no business being at the bottom of a river in the middle of nowhere. Jeremiah's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the latch. Jack, still panting, watched in silence. It creaked open. No gold, no jewels, just a tightly packed leather bag and several heavy rocks meant to weigh it down. Inside the bag papers, dozens of them, some stained, some yellowed, but still readable. Jeremiah unfolded the first one. The ink had faded with time, but the words were clear. Land deeds, dozens of them. Signed, notarized, official-looking documents claims to massive stretches of land throughout the Rocky Mountains. Names, dates, boundaries, some over a century old. The forest whispered around them, wind weaving through the pines as Jeremiah and Jack stared at each other in disbelief. "This isn't treasure," Jack finally said. Jeremiah nodded. "It's something worse. Or maybe something bigger." They sifted through the contents in silence. The realization hit slowly. These deeds weren't meant to be found. They had been dumped, buried, hidden, to keep a secret. Jeremiah knelt beside the chest, flipping through the brittle documents, each one more unbelievable than the last. The lands described weren't just remote patches of wilderness. They were mineral-rich territories areas, long protected, even sacred in some local traditions. Jack stood behind him, silent but watchful, letting the weight of it all sink in. "These were meant to disappear," Jeremiah whispered. Jack nodded slowly. Someone wanted them buried, permanently. The more they read, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just an accidental loss or a forgotten relic. These deeds had been dumped with intention. The heavy rocks in the chest weren't just ballast, they were silencers. Whoever the 5 men were, they hadn't expected anyone to witness their midnight ritual, let alone recover what they discarded. But now, the chest was on land, and its secret had surfaced. Jeremiah picked up his satellite phone, hands damp from the river and adrenaline. The police needed to know. This wasn't just a matter of theft or Litteringit smelled of something far worse. When the call connected, his voice was calm but urgent. "We found something. Something serious. Land deeds. Dozens of them. Looks like they were dumped here last night. We saw them. 5 men. Around midnight." The dispatcher paused, then responded with solemn clarity. "We're sending a unit. Expect us in 2 hours." They were in a remote area of the Rockies, and Jeremiah knew every second mattered. He and Jack dragged the chest further onto the bank and covered it loosely with brush in case the men came back. Then they waited watching, listening, every sound sharp as a blade. Jeremiah kept his bow close. Jack leaned on a tree stump, the fire in his eyes now burning hotter than ever. Whatever these documents were, whatever power they held, it was obvious they had stumbled onto something dangerous. The wind shifted. Jeremiah's gut twisted. But the men never returned. At last, 2 police vehicles rumbled over the nearby trail, kicking up dirt and pine needles. Jeremiah stepped forward, waving them down. He showed them the chest. The officers, skeptical at first, grew visibly unsettled as they flipped through the papers. One officer, younger and sharp-eyed, stopped mid-page, his face paling. "These signatures," he muttered. He handed one of the pages to his partner, who frowned. "That's not just any name." "It was a name known in the area," a man whispered about more than spoken of. A powerful figure with deep criminal ties, a local mob boss who had evaded prosecution for years. His influence stretched across businesses, real estate, and even local officials. The deeds in the chest were part of a massive illegal land grab territories once set aside for preservation, now quietly being reassigned for mining rights. The plan, the officers explained as they called for backup, was to build an industrial excavation site right in the heart of the mountains. The soil here was rich, perfect for extraction. But building such an operation would destroy ecosystems, reroute rivers, and strip the land bare. And the kicker? Some of the documents were already pre-signed, not just by the mob boss, by the mayor himself. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. "He's in on it," the officer nodded grimly. "We've had suspicions, no proof. Until now." Jack exhaled sharply, a long, whistling breath of both awe and disbelief. "That's why they dumped it," he said. "They were going to move forward with the deal. But someone on the inside got nervous. The officers made more calls. The area was secured. The chest was logged as evidence. And before the sun could set, the police had issued warrants first for the mob boss, then for a string of associates, and finally for the mayor. Over the next few days, the story exploded. News helicopters hovered over the trailhead. Reporters interviewed rangers and residents. Jeremiah and Jack, however, stayed silent. They had no desire for fame. They hadn't gone into the forest to become heroes. They had simply followed their instincts, and the wild had trusted them with its secret.